Okay, that's the question of everyone. Dagos pa ang Fiesta ni Ina, or do we still have the Peñafrancia this year? And next slide. Okay, that's what I was sharing a while ago. All these pre-colonial figures like Antonio Pigafetta, Miguel Luarca, and the rest of the early history on the Philippines, they all spoke about indigenous fiestas. Next slide. Okay, this the same thing. Next slide, please. And then the next one. Okay. Yeah. So in a way, we could say the Spanish used these indigenous fiestas as a tool for introducing the Christian message. So because of the extravagance of this fiesta, it practically drew crowd from all walks of life. If you could recall, the Spanish introduced the system of reducciones, of gathering people in pueblos, bajos las campanas, in order that they could better introduce the Christian message to them and help them organize into communities. And so the fiestas are crowd gatherers for a fact, and they use this as a vehicle for gathering people. At the same time, it also reinforced the communal identity. It's a communal identity of the people. So because fiestas vary from different places, so in a way, when they do this, the Christian message is received in the different dispositions of the indigenous people. And so the missionaries saw this as an opportunity to draw people, to gather people. And so based on the accounts of Reinhard Wendt, so they use the fiestas to anchor the Christian image more strongly in the minds of the population. So it kind of portrayed a triumphalistic view of Christianity, for example, because we can afford fiestas, we can afford to organize these communal activities, then it says a lot. It says volume about Christianity. Okay, so Florentino Ornedo, next slide, please. Florentino Ornedo is one of my professors way back in the University of Santo Tomas. He said there are like 3 essential organically related elements of fiestas. He says there is a myth, then there is the ritual, and then there is the purpose. And until today, this is very much practiced. For example, myths, no matter, well, the pre-colonial fiesta, they share the same element with the Christianized fiesta. Okay, so when the missionaries introduced the liturgical fiestas like Easter, like Corpus Christi, and the patron saints, the content practically changed, but these 3 essential organically related elements, they stayed. There's a myth, there's a ritual, and there is a purpose. The myth, practically, it is the narrative around which the fiesta revolve around. So even in the present novena, before you go to the prayers, there is a sort of a historical background of the fiesta. And almost every time, for example, in the case of the Peñafrancia Fiesta, if there is a new rector, he would introduce his own version of the Peñafrancia history. And so there is still the myth, which is being replaced by the historical background. Well, it explains what we are celebrating. It explains our communal identity. it also explains much about the people, the local culture. And then there is, of course, the ritual. And during the pre-colonial period, the ritual will be varied. So it could include nature worship. It could include dancing, poetry, singing, all these things. And they are very much still present in this contemporary era. Even with the advent of liturgy, of course, ritual is very much preserved. And ritual is very much important in promoting the communal identity of the people. It is something that is intuitive. It is something that is spontaneous for everyone. And so ritual is very much part of it. And then, of course, the purpose, why we all do these things. So they are still very much present today. And this is practically what the priests would invest in whenever they preach, for example. And then even the late Archbishop Legazpi, way back in 2010, when on the eve of the celebration of the 300th anniversary of the devotion, he invited the people to go back to the origins of the fiesta. So next slide, please. So okay, so in 2010, Archbishop Legazpi wrote the Pastoral Letter entitled Principalmente a la Misa. So it recalled the simple beginnings of the devotion. Well, there was already the chapel, there was already the image, there was already the procession, and the Bicolanos, they gather every Saturday for the Mass. And so we could say that we could ask the question, which fiesta are we referring to when we ask, do we still have Peñafrancia Fiesta this year? Is it the pre-colonial concept of fiesta, or is it the contemporary Christianized fiesta? Of course, it is the religiosity of the people here in the Philippines is still very much popular in nature, and that's why there is always this this intermarriage between the popular and then the liturgical, the official and then the non-official. And so if you go back to the origins of the devotion, it doesn't seem to contain the pre-colonial concept of fiesta. What, for example, what Archbishop Legazpi highlighted in his pastoral letter is that there was a chapel already, there is this image and procession and the Mass. And so we could say that we can still have Peñafrancia Fiesta, even without the usual merriment, even without the usual festive atmosphere. In fact, in the history of the devotion, not all Peñafrancia Fiesta are, in fact, full of merriment. For example, if you go back, can we go to the next slide, please? Well, that's the origin. Even Simon Vela, right from the start of the devotion, it was already arduous on his part to make the journey from France to Spain. And then the next slide, please. And for example, what happened in Colgante Bridge in the fiesta of September 16, 1972, the bridge here in Naga, named Colgante Bridge, collapsed. And this is where the Fluvial Procession usually would pass by. So it was a big tragedy for all the people. And then the next slide, there was also the time when the image was stolen in August 15, 1981. And so when the caretaker of the shrine woke up at around 4:30 in the morning, the image was already gone. And it took 9 months before the Bishop of Cáceres was able to recover the image. And so not all Peñafrancia Fiesta are indeed full of merriment. There are like tragedies like this. But the devotion of the people continued. Okay, So is it how much time do we have? Okay. Anyway, I'll wrap. What's that?
You're okay. You can keep going.
Okay, I'll wrap up the whole thing. Well, in a way, what I'm trying to say is that which fiesta are we referring to? Is it the pre-colonial or is it the present? While the present still has or it possesses still all the pre-colonial elements in it, but nevertheless, like the prism I was talking a while ago, we can dissect the devotion. We can dissect the fiesta in its many strands. Yes, there could be a suspension and cancellation of the merriment, like the traditional concerts, the videoke challenge, the parade, civic parade, the military parade. All these things could be suspended while the liturgical or the Christian fiesta can go on. And so that is the reason why way back in 2011, the Archdiocese of Casparis sought to purify, in a sort, close quotation mark, purify the devotion to Our Lady of Peñafrancia by doing away with the obviously commercialized elements in it. Like, for example, closing the streets where the procession would usually pass by, closing the streets all because there will be a beer plaza. Or the pageantry, for example, they removed the Miss Peñafrancia, for example, the local pageantry. So they did away a lot of things in order to, it's in a sort of saying, in a way of saying, sanitize the Peñafrancia Fiesta from its commercial and probably pre-colonial elements. That is why way back also in I think it's way back in 1982 that the CBCP, the Catholic Bishops' Conference of the Philippines, issued a pastoral letter entitled Ang Mahal na Birhen, saying that while popular religiosity contain valid elements of authentic faith, of the identity of the local culture, and yet it needs a sort of a purification. It needs to be mature and intrepid, like the love of the Bicolanos for Ina. So I'll end with my question by answering it with a yes and a no. Do we still have a Peñafrancia Fiesta this year? Well, if you're referring to the pre-colonial fiesta, I would say I don't think we will have that one, or I don't think we did have that one this year. And how about the Christianized or the liturgical fiesta? Yeah, I think it will go on. So thank you very much for listening. Okay.
So thank you, Father Francis. So our next speaker is Ma'am Maggie. Yes, Ma'am. Yeah, yes.
Okay. So thank you, Father Francis. That was really interesting and really informative. And I think a lot of the things that I'm going to present on will really echo some elements of what you say and add on to the research that you've been doing for a while now.
Emily, laptop.
Okay. All right, so I'll go ahead and start. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So first, maraming aga to our Bicol viewers, magandang umaga to our viewers elsewhere across the Philippines, and good evening to everyone here in California and the US. I also want to thank Earl for putting the Zoom presentation together. I think his internet kicked him off, but we'll go on without him for now. But it is an honor, it is an honor to be invited to present alongside other Bicol scholars, especially during the time of Fiesta for Ina. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm a US-born Filipina, and my Filipino side of the family is based in Bulacan. And so the first question I often get asked is, why did I choose to study Ina and Bicol? And secondly, I get asked, what does it mean to do an archaeology for Our Lady of Peñafrancia? What is there to dig that can tell us about this very modern phenomena and modern devotion and experience? So during this presentation, I'm going to answer both of those questions. But before I get there, I want to just dive directly into what my research project is and the fieldwork that I've been working on. So before I even get there, though, I do want to preface that this is an ongoing project. This is my dissertation project. So if anyone watching is interested in any of this or wants to contribute their experiences, I'm definitely open to dialoguing and discussing these topics in the future. Okay, so the core of my project is to investigate the complex process of Spanish colonialism in the Bicol region, specifically in Camarines Sur. So colonialism and Catholicism are inextricably linked, and Camarines Sur stands out as one of the earliest regions in the Philippines to convert to Catholicism. So we know based on historical records that the Spanish first had contact in the Philippines in 1521, followed by official colonial administration in 1565. And as missionaries spread throughout Luzon, the Spanish built churches throughout the lowlands with the explicit goal of resettling people into communities based around the church, which is what Father Francis was just talking about, Bajo de Cabana, or under the bell. And the purpose of this was to place people, for lack of a better word, under basically control of the Spanish. If they were living closer to the church, they could adhere to the schedule of the churches, they could attend Mass, and they can basically be integrated into Spanish colonial life more easily than if they were living further away. So the Diocese of Casparis, now the Archdiocese, was one of the earliest of its kind established in the Philippines. San Francisco Church in Nueva Cáceres, now Naga City, was built in the 1570s, and the diocese followed in 1595, which was just 30 years after formal establishment of the Philippines as a Spanish colony. And so this is the Catholic community that eventually developed into devotees for Our Lady of Peñafrancia some 100 years later in 1710. And so for those of you who aren't very familiar with the background of Our Lady of Peñafrancia, I'll just briefly go through that. And so historical records indicate that the Cimarrones, an ethnic minority Bicol group in the mountains, converted to Christianity and reportedly requested that a chapel be built for their use. And it was Miguel Robles de Covarrubias who had made a promise during his years in Cavite that he would build a shrine for Peñafrancia. He was relocated to Naga, and so when the Cimarrones requested that chapel, he decided he would dedicate one to Peñafrancia. He had prayed to her often during his illnesses and recovered, and so he wanted to basically fulfill his devotion to her. And so to complete the shrine that was built, a sculptor carved a statue of the Virgin Mary, Our Lady of Peñafrancia, holding infant Jesus. And this was based on a picture of the original image of Our Lady of Peñafrancia from Salamanca, Spain. So to complete the original image, a dog was sacrificed and its blood was painted on the image to give her the same dark facial tone of the original Spanish image. And then the dog was thrown into the Bicol River. And so one of the earliest miracles surrounding the devotion to Peñafrancia was that the dog survived. It returned to life, swam through the river, and ran back home. And since then, devotees refer to Our Lady of Peñafrancia as Ina, or Mother, and they pray to her for good health, safety, and blessings. And the Peñafrancia Shrine, though rebuilt over time, is still actively used today alongside the Bicol River. And this is an integral mark on the landscape for devotion to Ina. And we know, based on the reason we're all here, that the devotion has grown immensely over the past 310 years. Nueva Cáceres has become known as the pilgrim city of Naga, to account for the millions of pilgrims and devotees who come each September for the fiesta. Many of us here today on Zoom, if there was no pandemic, we would be in Naga, we would be participating in these events, gathering with friends and family, attending Mass, and going to the many religious and civic events centered around Ina's feast day. And so despite this unique story, Catholic fiestas and devotion to santos are actually common across the Philippines. We know of Santo Niño, Our Lady of Manaoag, Black Nazarene, Inulid. There's an endless list of santos and devotions across the Bicol region, across the Philippines, and even across the global Catholic world. But the question I want to explore more specifically, linking Spanish colonialism to the iconography of Peñafrancia, is how and why did this devotion to Ina develop so intensely, and what does it tell us about Bicol Catholicism? And to answer these questions, I want to use archaeological methods to explore the iconography of Ina. What elements make up her image? But also, how do people interact with her? Not just during fiesta time, but also in everyday life. And so this topic has, of course, been studied many times by many different people. But I want to bring that archaeological perspective to kind of to bring a different holistic approach to it and to contribute to the different perspectives that have already been done over the past years. And of course, also many different scholars have always been interested in religious syncretism, folk Catholicism, and the intersection of pre-colonial and colonial practices. The disruption of Spanish colonialism led to many different localized versions of Philippine Catholicism. And so some of my more specific questions to push through this research are: what kind of cultural climate facilitated the swift colonization and rapid conversion to Catholicism in Bicol? So basically, because conversion was so quick in Bicol compared to other regions, I want to understand what was unique about Bicol and about the people there that made that happen in comparison to, say, other regions of the lowlands. Another question: did elements of pre-Spanish Bicol identity influence Catholic religiosity, and are they related to Our Lady of Peñafrancia in any way? 3, how is the image of Ina used to perform religiosity and devotion? And 4, what makes Bicol religiosity unique from the rest of the Philippines? And so what I hope to do over the course of developing this dissertation project is to continuously circle back to the strategies that Bicolanos took to maintain their communities through the disruption of missionization and reduction. And so the Bicol Archaeological Project has been excavating colonial churches in Camarines Sur since 2016. Based on that research, it's hypothesized that Bicolanos quickly and collectively converted to Catholicism during the Spanish period as a strategy to maintain not only their collective identity, but to also maintain their status, property, and lifestyle as much as possible. And so my goal in contributing to the archaeological project, in kind of a less traditional way maybe, is to map out both historical and modern interactions with Ina as a Bicol icon in order to better understand this phenomenon in devotion and to better understand collective Bicol religious identity as it has changed and evolved over the past several hundred years. And so that's why I really appreciated your presentation, Father Francis, because you've mentioned how the devotion, it's not quite always linear. It's not the same year after year. It's been changing, it's been evolving. This year it's certainly changing different quite a bit. And so what I'm interested in is what's always igniting those changes? What's motivating them and why do they occur? And so to address those questions, I want to focus on Ina as an iconography. So there are two theoretical lenses that I want to approach this project from. The first is hybridity. So in archaeology, there's a tendency to overuse the word hybridity and to simplify it to its basic meaning of mixed cultures. But hybridity can be considered a social practice and a quality. And what I want to do is to look at Homi Bhabha's explanation of hybridity and even mimicry. And he defines hybridity as a broad realm created within colonial encounters in which identity is dynamic and performative through the mutual exchange of culture between the colonized and the colonizer. And I really want to focus on that word mutual. And so archaeology is an ideal method for exploring this duality between the colonizer and the colonized, because we can look into those relationships. We can look at the spaces that these relationships inhabit, where these daily practices are organized and repeated every day, every year, over time. So just because Camarina Sur was converted quickly, it doesn't mean that the people there were passively receiving Spanish culture. It's important to acknowledge that not all colonial cultures resulted in passively receiving the culture of the colonizer. This type of discourse promotes the erasure of agency. And so the inhabitants of Bicol likely responded to Spanish missionization in a multitude of ways for several different reasons. And it's very important for us to acknowledge local agency within these colonial encounters. Basically, that people had choices and strategized their way through these circumstances. And the second theoretical lens I wanted to look at is placemaking. So social identity is enacted within an abstract space, and placemaking occurs when these spaces take on locality and physicality through repeated behaviors and material culture. So if our religion and our belief systems are based in spirituality, those are abstract spaces, and they become physical spaces when we, through performance, through community sharing, and churches are a really great example of those spaces becoming places where the community comes together to maintain their identity, to perform their identity, to create places of memory, and to renegotiate their identity into Catholic devotions like Our Lady of Peñafrancia. But for me, what's really interesting about placemaking, about these spaces, and about the devotion for Ina is that it's not just within the church. Devotion to Ina takes place in the street, in the river for Flubial Procession with Pagsumpo. There are multiple places, especially now with masses being streamed online for accessibility, with people sharing prayers via media, on TV, through email. These physical places are again being shifted into different spaces. So there's a lot of transformations going on even now as we adapt to different times. And so here's where the archaeology starts to come in. So traditionally, archaeologists, we excavate. If we're interested in peoples and cultures, majority of people that have ever lived on Earth have already passed. And so any evidences of what they did, the places they inhabited, the stuff that they used, it's going to be underground. And so that's why we dig. But I want to preface with this definition of archaeology. So archaeology is the study of people through the analysis of material culture or artifacts and place. So it's important to study the stuff that people had and also the way that it was left in the world, how it moved through the world, how people interacted with these spaces and with these things. And so I want to use these archaeological methods to study the experience of devotion to Ina, because it is an ongoing experience. It is a current and modernized experience, basically. And so the idea is to use these archaeological methods of looking at artifacts, looking at material culture, looking at how these things move throughout the city and throughout the landscape, and understanding basically how that works and why it works the way that it does. And so the most obvious aspect of looking at the iconography of Ina is just what does she look like? How does she appear? What are the elements of her image? And so this is pulled off of the Archdiocese Facebook page, which is a reservoir of information on Ina right now. But it's important to know the halo, the adornment on her face, the fact that she's carrying infant Jesus, the crown, the mantle that she wears, the colors that make up her appearance. All of those are very important, of course. And I won't have time to go too much into detail on these elements of her image. What I want to do is focus more on a different part of her iconography, in the way that how do people interact with her iconography. And so what I'm interested in too is how Ina as an icon moves around the world and how do people interact with her. And so there are so many different reiterations and replicas basically of that first original image that was built in Naga on the Bicol River in 1710. There's of course the original image, which is housed near the Peñafrancia Basilica, and then there's another image of Peñafrancia that lives in the Archbishop's residence, and then there are other images of Peñafrancia that live in the different parishes in the Archdiocese, and the list essentially goes on and on. There are parishes outside of Camarines Sur who might have an image of Ina. And then we also see how her image is replicated in other different ways. Small santos that you can buy on the street, basically. You can go into shops, you can buy them from vendors. People put them out in their homes, on the dashboard of their car. Ina's image is printed on t-shirts, printed in graphics. Girls dress up as Ina, dressing like the mantle for dances, for parades, for contests. There's so many different ways that her image is replicated in media and for civic purposes or for religious purposes. And so part of my project is looking at what do those images mean, and how do people choose to own them or choose to interact with them, both in the church and outside. Like I said before, I'm also interested in how Ina moves throughout the city. So I want to briefly focus on the processions that typically happen every year during the fiesta, that draw pretty much the most crowds, and they follow very historical roots. And so the first procession I want to talk about is the Dawn Procession. So these pictures were taken last year on September 15, and basically how this is the first procession of Ina that kind of kicks off the fiesta. And so the Dawn Procession begins around 3 or 4 a.m. when crowds gather for a very penitential procession. We walk following Ina on the Andas from the Peñafrancia Basilica, where she lives all year. And we walk, sorry I haven't converted it to kilometers, but it's about 1.6 miles from Basilica to the Peñafrancia Shrine. And the shrine is the original place where the first shrine for Ina was built in 1710. Like I said, it's a penitential procession. It's pretty quiet. Everyone's holding candles. It's very calm, praying the rosary, singing songs. And once we reach the shrine, there's a mass. And everyone has the ability to go up, press their handkerchiefs to Ina, and basically experience that in a penitential way. And this is a very different experience than when the same iteration of Ina moves through Naga during Traslacion later that afternoon. So again, there's the celebration of Mass before the image moves through the city on her way to the Naga Cathedral. This is not a penitential, typically not a penitential procession. There are thousands upon thousands of more people. There's more groups. So the cofradia is there. Again, you have voyadores, you have many devotees coming, and there's so much people that it's very difficult to get to Ina to even be close to her. And again, that event is followed by the celebration of Mass at Naga Cathedral. Ina stays at Naga Cathedral. Naga Cathedral is basically the hub for activity. That's where you can go for mental blessings. There's evening processions there. Stays that way for the remainder of the novena, the 9-day prayer. Ina moves through the city one more time. There are other processions happening in between, but this is the last major procession. Ina moves through the city one more major time from Naga Cathedral down to the river, and then back up the river for the Fluvial Procession on her way back to the Peñafrancia Basilica. And so again, this is a very different type of procession. It's not very penitential until it gets up. It has the elements of merriment that Father Francis was talking about. It's very loud, but also prayerful, but again, very different from that Dawn Procession that happened 9 days earlier. And so what I'm interested archaeologically from here is again, the relationship of Ina, the people, and the place. Each of these routes is very different, has a very different atmosphere, very different intention, and it's kind of known. Everyone who participates knows what to expect. They know the Dawn processions will be quiet and penitential and prayerful, whereas the other processions will have different energies. And so that's what I'm interested in terms of the landscape, the urban landscape. I won't talk too much since I'm running a bit out of time about Pagsungko, but Pagsungko is another aspect of the devotion that I'm interested in. So basically, a brief description of this is it's a way to bring the devotion to multiple, sometimes more remote parts of the Archdiocese. Basically, in the month to several weeks leading up to the fiesta, different parishes, schools, businesses will have their own small fiesta or procession for Ina. So for example, the pictures here, I was invited, and Earl was there too, invited to join the parish St. Anthony de Padua and Camaligan to participate in their Pagsungko on the Bicol River. Basically, and this again was a more penitential one. This is a replica of what the larger, more official Flubial procession would have looked like, but it was small. It was the parish. It allowed people to participate in different ways leading up to the fiesta. I also participated in Pagsungko at a hotel, at an elementary school, and also at Peñafrancia Parish in Balaton, Lagunoy, which was a maritime procession on the ocean. There's many different ways to celebrate Ina even prior to the actual fiesta events that really engage in moving throughout the landscape. And so, like I said, this is an ongoing project. It's really unfortunately been slowed down because of the pandemic. To kind of forefront my positionality, as I said before earlier, my family is not from Bicol. We're from Bulacan, so this is a new experience for me, experiencing fiestas, especially Fiesta for Our Lady of Peñafrancia. So a lot of the questions I raised might feel rhetorical, might feel obvious, but the point is that I hope that if you've been experiencing this fiesta your whole life, to kind of just think about it in a different way, to kind of grow your knowledge in the types of discussions we can have about this topic. And I think some of the initial thoughts and conclusions I have based on my research is that, of course, Bicol is a very special place, and this devotion is really important, whether you're actively participating or whether it's something you've grown up in. It's a bonding aspect for community members, whether we do have that merit or not. Our Lady of Peñafrancia is a localized phenomena that is rooted in the Spanish colonial period, but it is rapidly shifting in a modernized world. It's changed quite a bit. It's been in flux, and I think, like Father Francis said, this year is an opportunity to kind of peel away those layers and look at the many different aspects, because the fiesta, the devotion, has such a rich history, so many events that revolve around it or have revolved around it and since been removed, and all of those kind of contribute to understanding Naga as a place, Bicol as a place, and looking at how a community adapts and shifts through many different periods of history. And to answer the first question I posed, why do I study this? The short answer is because my committee chair, Dr. Acabado, suggested it, and he's from Bicol. But the long answer is the devotion is a big part of Bicol as a place. If you Google search top fiestas in the Philippines, it's not going to come up on any list, but if you mention to someone, I've been to Bicol, I'm going to Bicol, I work in Bicol, then they know and they ask about the fiesta. They mention, oh, have you ever gone to the fiesta there? Or, oh, they're very religious there. So even if it's not coming up on those touristy sites, it's still an important event that's tied to the place and the people. And I think the rich story behind the devotion, the passion behind the people, the story of loving a mother, the love between a mother and child is one that people are really invested in. And I think that's a really important thing that's worth studying and worth contributing to, because it's a very important element of humanity that is valid of studying and contributing to. And I do have next steps for research. Hopefully I will get the opportunity to include these at some point in my dissertation, including more diverse participants, people with different roles, non-clergy Bicolanos. There's so many moving parts to this fiesta, the cofradia, the voitores. There's so many different parts, and I want to be able to include as many of them as possible in the next phases of my research. And that's basically all I have for this presentation. I went quite over, but I do also just want to give a quick thank you to everyone from the Archdiocese who helped me, especially Archbishop Tirona. A majority of my fieldwork was done from the Archbishop's residence and with everyone working there. And so I'm really grateful to that support that made this project happen.
Thank you, Ma'am Maddie. So our next speaker is Father Enrico. Good morning, Father. Father, nakamute po. Okay.
To hear a different perspective in our celebration of Our Lady of Peñafrancia. To start with, I am Father Enrico Pagdinawan, a member of the Archdiocese of Casparis clergy, together with Father Francis. And now I am in the academy. I am the principal of the Pili Parochial School and assigned parochial vicar of St. Raphael the Archangel Parish. So, to start with my presentation, it is good to know that Madi were able to observe Peñafrancia Fiesta as if part of our identity. Because I still remember when I'm still studying in Manila, every time I go to public places, and if there is someone heard me talking in Bicol, the next time they will ask me is that, are you going home this fiesta? So, Bicolano and Peñafrancia is somehow like a synonymous term, wherein it will always be associated with our identity. Now, in this particular talk, I will be presenting to you the communication dimension in Peñafrancia festivity. Why is it that Peñafrancia Fiesta is known to be associated with our culture as Bicolano? What would be the reason how this thing associated with our tradition? Now, to start with, allow me to define first what communication is. Okay? Communication. So, communication is defined as an act of transferring information from one place, person, or group to another. An act of transferring information from one place to person, group, or to another. Okay. So when we speak about it, there will always be three dimensions. And every time we talk about communication, it will always be referring to sender, the message being sent, and the recipient of the communication. So technically, when we speak about communication, it is always be a movement of message from the sender going to the receiver. The sender is the one who encodes the message. It is to verbal and non-verbal way, and it is the recipient who decodes it. Now, what is the connection of this to our daily activities? So technically, everything is about communication. Because when we speak about communication, there will always be two categories. We usually interpret and receive. The first one is verbal communication. So all types of communication that uses word. And the second one is the non-verbal communication. It is covering body language, gestures, how to dress, how to act, even our scent. Somehow it presents our own personal communication. Now, in what way communication process usually takes place? So, technically speaking, it will always be a movement. It is a message, a movement of a message being sent by a sender to a communication channel to a single or multiple receiver. So, the channel is very much important because it is the one that brings us the message that the sender wants to convey with the recipient or with the receiver. The sender is expected to encode the message, the information being conveyed, into an appropriate way to communication channel, and the receiver decodes it in order to understand what the message is. So usually that is the movement of communication. Now, if that is the case, then the next question here is that why we have this so-called misunderstanding? Why we have this so-called misunderstanding? So technically, misunderstanding can occur in any stages of communication. But in order to minimize misunderstanding or to go away with that, effective communication involves minimizing potential misunderstanding by covering any barriers of communication at each stage of the communication process. So it is very much important that in order to be an effective communicator, it is always be needed to overcome and define what would be the different barriers that hinders your communication to your recipient. Now, in what way? So an effective communicator should always make sure that there will always be a sense of clarification and reflection coming from his recipient. So the clarification and reflection coming from his recipients will give him the assurance that the message you want to convey is being clearly understood by the receiver. So technically, this is the communication process. This is the diagram of the communication process. So sana nakikita niyo. Are you able to see the screen that I'm sharing right now?
Yes po.
Okay, thank you. Now, so let's begin now with the elements of dimension of Peñafrancia activity. What are the different communication channels associated with this particular activity? So technically, there's a lot of communication channels used in Peñafrancia Fiesta. First is that the festivity itself is considered to be the channel used to convey the message of the festivity itself. What is that message? The love of God, the love of God to people, and in return, the response of people to the love being given to them by God. So technically, in what way this being observed? By considering the Our Lady of Peñafrancia as their biological mother. In what sense? What would be the categories that this is being really the tradition in Bicol region? It is obviously observed through their term of endearment by calling her Ina. If you will try to analyze and observe all throughout the Philippines, it is only here in Bicol region that you will really hear this term, Ina, a relational term, which is quite different from any devotions that we have. Now, I would like to present to you the different models of communication channel that was being used in this particular activity. The first one is the Christian communication channel. What do you mean by this? Christian communication channel is a type of channel wherein you're able to feel the tradition based on our faith as Christians that is being initiated by an individual person. And in the case of Peñafrancia Fiesta, it was Simon Vela, the one who were able to discover the image in Mount of Mount of Peñafrancia in Salamanca, Spain. It was Father Miguel Robles de Covarrubias, the one who introduced the devotion to the Bicol region, and of course Father Luis de la Torre, the one who introduced the devotion to Divino Rostro. So in Christian communication model, they are the person who becomes the instrument to present to the people the devotion to Our Lady of Peñafrancia. And from them, the devotion grows. On the other hand, the second, this message of channel is manifested in the Bicolanos to the different rituals and rites, symbolizing the recognition to the special participation of Our Lady to the redemptive act of Jesus Christ. Now, in this sense, the focus is not really who started the celebration, but more on to whom it is passed on, but rather what is the purpose of celebration to the receiver of the future. So in the case of Peñafrancia Fiesta, it is the love of God to the people by giving His mother of them, and in return, the people pay homage to Mary as an act of appreciation to God. So you will see, there will always be the one who will be giving the message and the reaction of the recipient to the message that they receive. So the second aspect is, or the second element is what we call the linear model of communication. So the linear model of communication is that it is referring to the religious experiences of the people developed because of the initiative of the two sources of information, the spiritual message from God and the priest to promote the devotion that is led to the understanding and appreciation of the devotion. If the Christian communication model tells us about the instrument that was being used to convey the message of this fiesta, the linear communication model tells us about the religious experiences. Why is it that despite of the fact, after long years, Peñafrancia Fiesta were able to survive? Because the people still experience the non-verbal communication, that as if every time they attend the fiesta, they feel the presence of God. They feel the love of God. They feel the maternal care of a mother every time they go to this particular festivity. So most probably it is one of the reasons why it was able to survive. The second is encoding the message. Encoding the messages is that an act of use of appropriate language conveying the information simply and clearly and anticipate the eliminate likely causes of confusion and understanding. So in this particular act, encoded message in the devotion is telling us about the love of God to the people through His Mother Mary and the love of people to God by participating in the fiesta. There are a lot of messages presented in this fiesta, encoded messages that is being presented in this celebration. First is the different activities being initiated. In the celebration, the expression of Bicolanos of their devotion to Our Lady of Peñafrancia expressed not just in words or in action, but even in the icon of faith that consists verbal and non-verbal messages. And these are the visibly seen in the icon of Our Lady of Peñafrancia. So allow me to share with you the different interpretation of these messages. First is that the sign of encoded messages. The image of Ina is seen as one of the image of Ina is considered to be very popular because people see the image as somehow this devotion belongs to them, considering the physical appearance of Ina. It has a Bicolano color, brown, compared to most images here in the Philippines who have mestiza features. That is why people were able to relate with her because of that mentality, na as if they feel that Ina belongs to them because of the physical features she has. Second is that it has a small stature and size, signifies the belongingness to the first settlers of the region, the Cimarrones. And of course, aside from that, the eyes of the image are directed to this devotee, which affirms the message of his divine motherhood. The devotees feel as if the image is watching them. I remember there was a particular devotee will always tell me, Father, every time I look Ina in the eyes as if she is looking at me. So it has an impact. So the icon itself presents to us a non-verbal communication. And of course, the royalty of the image. It was decorated to highlight the special place of Mary to the life of Bicolanos, recognizing not just her motherhood, but even her queenship. So if you will try to observe how she is being presented to us, she is very regal, very royal. Because for us Bicolanos, she is not just a mother, she is also a queen. Now, in this sense, what would be the decoding messages? Remember, encoding messages is the messages that is being presented by the sender of the message. Decoding messages is the interpretation of the people who were able to receive the messages. Once the recipient receive the messages, it needs to be decoded. And successful decoding is also a vital in communications skill. So people will decode and understand messages in different ways. Decoded messages and Peñafrancia activities in the fiesta and cultures and tradition developed by the people based on these practices. In what sense? They were able to create different activities out of that faith they have with God, and out of that experiences, spiritual experiences they have every time they attend Peñafrancia. So what are the different decoded messages that was being created and manifested in different activities? The first one is Traslacion procession. It is an act of transferring the image from the Basilica Minore to Cathedral for 9 days. And for 9 days novena, masses to procession. And in some archaeologists and some anthropologists, they considered it as an act of bayanihan system. A bayanihan system which invent to us Filipinos. It is also an act of respect to women, paggalang sa kababaihan. It is also a manifestation of being a gentleman, pagtama Ginoo, because they were able to pay respect to a woman. And it is also an act of paggalang sa magulang or a sense of respect to the elders, knowing the fact that they consider Ina as their mother. Aside from that, in later years, they were able to formulate the so-called Dawn Procession. It was added later by the church that involves women and carrying the andas, and it practically involves the opportunity for women to get near the image in contrast to a much rowdy translation. So these are the non-verbal messages that is being manifested in these practices. Bicolanos really recognize equality between men and women. So it also manifests the women empowerment. And of course, the solidarity among women, because majority of the participants in this procession are composed of women. And of course, the last interpretation is the Flubial Procession. So the Fluvial Procession is a procession to the water to transfer the image from cathedral to Basilica Minore. So what is the non-verbal communication decoded in these particular practices? First is that the purification of paganistic culture and the sense of divine and holiness, because they believe that during those times, if the image were able to pass on a certain places, then these places is being sanctified by God. So that's the belief of early Bicolanos, which until now it is being practiced. Now, what would be the feedback and reflection process after this particular messages was being given to the people? What would be the feedback and reflection process of the people as the recipient? So the final part of communication is feedback, wherein the recipient lets the sender knows that they have received and understood the message. And the recipients of the messages are likely to provide feedbacks on how they have understood the messages to the verbal and non-verbal communication. So technically, this would be the feedback and reflection process of communication. First is that there is a continuously growing of devotees yearly. According to Tourism Council of the Philippines, approximately there is 4 to 5 million devotees usually gathered here in Naga City every September. Second is that the use of mantra in the devotional practices. So the devotion is developing from a simple act of reverence to procession. Now there's a lot of things associated with the devotion. Number 3 is the integration of devotion to the different homes and institutions. If you go to different homes here in Naga City, especially in Camarines, so you will see different images being displayed in their altar. And of course, the localization of devotional practices to the different parishes. In this pandemic time, the Archdiocese were able to encourage priests to make their own Peñafrancia version in their parishes in order to continuously promote the devotion. Now, assessing all these things, what would be the pattern of communication process happen in this fiesta? So technically, it was God who sends the message to us. And the message that he wants to send is his love to the people. And in what way? The channel of this message is through devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary. And it is manifested to the different activities, especially the activities of Peñafrancia Fiesta. Who are the recipient? The people or the lay faithful. In what way they were able to feedback and reflect? By loving God. By loving God through his mother Mary. In what sense? By participating in the fiesta activity. And it is being manifested in the different translations and processions, and it is being given to God. So, to end with this discussion, why is it that Peñafrancia Fiesta is associated with us Bicolanos? Because it is deeply rooted in our identity. Bicolanos are known to be very religious because of our devotion to Our Lady of Peñafrancia. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Father Enrico. So our next speaker is Sir Earl. Hi, sir.
Thank you, Martin. Okay. First, let me share my screen. Okay. So, so I hope my internet won't cut me again. Okay. So first of all, I would like to thank my two fathers, Father Francis and Father Enrico, joining joining in this panel to converse about Peñafrancia, and to, of course, to Madi. Um, so the three first lectures were basically talk most of the that I'm going to talk about. It's easy for me to not to talk about it anymore. So maybe I'll just skip some slides later. Okay, so again, Diyos na maray na aga po, or udto sa Satuya Gabos, and good evening to Maddie and Sir Buboy and others in the US who's watching with us. So in this I'm going to share a portion of my graduate thesis that I'm working on. So I made a paper about this for this lecture. So let me read the paper eventually. But the focus will be on Cofradia. Okay, so for this lecture, we'll Cofradia de San Jose in the entangled assemblage in the making of a pilgrimage city of Naga during the fiesta. So that's the question. That's the lecture objective for this paper. So to begin, alongside education, fascination with the Peñafrancia Fiesta is impelled by the draw of Naga as a city and a place of homecoming every September, especially to Bicolanos or as a Bicolano. So looking back at the fiestas I participated in, I realized that the fiesta's two main highlights, gauged through the most crowded and anticipated activities, are the Traslacion procession and the Fluvial processions, which were mentioned from the three unfortunately that are canceled for this year. So both processions for me elicit peculiar feelings, evoking multiple senses. So this becomes more evident through observing the devotees profoundly rejoicing Viva la Virgen, Viva la Nuestra Señora de Peñafrancia, and the crowds acclaiming loudly Viva in return. So prominent among these devotees belong to the Cofradia de San Jose. Cofradia is a instituted group of men handling the mobility of the image of Our Lady of Peñafrancia. We Bicolanos ethnographically called or addressed as Ina or Mother. So with this scene repeated, the Traslacion and the Fluvial, and other processions that Maddie mentioned earlier, so beginning in the Basilica, the Peñafrancia Shrine, the Cathedral, the Bicol River, basically the religious spaces, so covering the center and edges of the city, and during the 9-day novenarium that starts in the Traslacion, and processions immediately succeeding. So the course of the procession and city's aura and mood are transformed for me into something religious. So hence, this fascination with the Peñafrancia in Naga City generates my interest personally as a Bicolano and as an anthropology student in pursuing the Cofradia as a focus of my study. Okay, so probably I'll be skipping some slides about history of Peñafrancia devotion. Okay, and okay, so okay, this slide with that Father thank you, Father Francis, for talking about this. So I'll just briefly talk about this. So in 2010, the then President Benigno Aquino, through the proclamation number 33 series of 2010, declared the city of Naga and the province of Camarines Sur as a pilgrimage city, as a pilgrimage capital of the Bicol region. So the Naga city as pilgrimage city, however, did not just started in 2010. So the city has been the center of devotion ever since. So the context is, for me, the context is that for state entities to legally or officially protect the pilgrimage city from commercialization activities, that were happening the past fiesta years that the clergy had observed, especially in preparation for the tercentenary celebration or in 2010. So this shapes the commodified fiesta than of a religious or pilgrimage activity. So um, in the recent years, started in 2010, 2007, 2008, a preparation to the third centenary activity in 2010, the Catholic Church of Casparis conducted a massive drive of the reimagination of the fiesta. So an example of this is the publication of cheap price booklet explaining the do's and don'ts of a devotee or a pilgrim in Peñafrancia Fiesta. So it's a guide to know the true meaning of the fiesta according to the church purview. So for the church, the Peñafrancia Fiesta is a religious festivity. So therefore, activities contrary to the nature of what is religious should be banned. So for example, the beer plazas and bakbakan sa Danlugan, among others. And also other religious activities such as pageants and other parades should be put into the sideline. That's why recently, we've been observing that most of the commercialized activities, the non-religious activities, are happening outside the Traslacion and Fluvial processions, a bit in between the outside. Okay, so okay. One of the effect of this ramification um, is the reimagination of being a devotee, or hence the cofradia was introduced. So the then Archbishop Legazpi points out that the nature of the Peñafrancia um, as is a religious activity clothed with religious embodiment is contrary to the practice of commercialization that they've been observing um, prior to the third centenary activities. So the practice of commercialization that we can also observe, like for example, that's happening in Cebu, in Cebu, yes, that's with the call of Archbishop for the renewal of the devotion and celebration of the Peñafrancia Fiesta. Um, the Archdiocese of Casparis, how do we participate or how a devotee could participate in the fiesta? So, Cofradia the renewal program of the Archdiocese of the Peñafrancia Fiesta. The Cofradia de San Jose. Cofradia de San Jose is like a group of need and mobility of Ina during the ability, every flow, every movement of Ina, their Cofradia. So they should be the standard of discipline and should work under the church purview. So we'll try to explain this a little bit later. Okay. So their collective goal is to guard and protect Ina. So the mission for them is to deliver. The mission for them is to deliver Ina in time scheduled by the church authorities. So as you can see, during my fieldwork, I've been like a de facto photographer of the Cofradia. So that's why when they see me, they post for picture. Okay. The Cofradia. So aside from the Cofradia de San Jose, during my fieldwork, I encountered other group of voyadores. Voyadores devotees participate throughout the procession. Okay, who participates in the rowdy procession during the Flubial Processions. Who's identified by the church and um, cofradia as cofradia membre also. For being the cofradia during the months of August and September. So this means that being a cofradia full time for the whole year, not only for the months of September or August, so that they can participate in the procession. So it's a yearly formation. So this entails that 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 being a cofradia member requires a daily commitment to the Catholic religious life, and this can be observed through these following guidelines. So attend Sunday masses, attend Sunday formation, read the Bible daily, and pray the rosary daily. So it's not only about processions and mobility. So it's about personal Christian um, living. Okay. So during the processions, the T-shirt is important. So interestingly, the T-shirt are sponsored by business establishments, provided that the T-shirts have their logos or name as a form of endorsement. So the T-shirt is a sort of identity to give you access to spaces that non-cofradia are allowed. So, but sometimes they are target because they are voyador. They're being targeted by other voyadores groups, which is what they call as the colorum voyador or the devote voyador. So, devote because so there's a sort of othering from from voyadores devotees among the voyadores devotees. So devote is a keyword for drinking alcohol or being drunk and making sins like pagpapasali, pasalihon during the processions or activities. Okay. So one of the cofradia I am working with classified voyadores into this. The devoto, the cofradia, and other non-drinking devotees. The devota, meaning because they are also part of the um, officially acknowledged devotees by the church authorities, but they are wearing boots because they are military or uniform personnel from the PNP and then the AFP. And then the devote, for, as I have said, for drinking. So if we try to, for a snapshot of other assemblage, the Adonais love as a group is a vital to the cofradia in helping them conduct Catholic activities significant to the formation and reformation process to accomplish a church purview of the fiesta. So this, for example, initiation process, life spirituality seminars, and basic ecclesiastical um, um, teachings. So the initiation process is like a 1 or 2 day life and spirituality seminar. This is a Catholic ritual where the church and where the church and participants believes that the Holy Spirit comes to the initiates or participants. So which includes this is an example of a video that I took with their spirituality seminar for the AFE. So what they do here is like there's a recollection, and then after there's like the one member, one of the Adonai Slav, will like pray or something that they believe that there's a Holy Spirit comes to the initiates. So as part of some stories that during our conversations, one of the cofradia I'm working with mentions that during this procession, he felt the baptism of fire. That it was like in Bicol, isusuko mo ang sarili mo sa taas or kaina to surrender yourself to the Lord or to ina. To ina. Okay. He further explained that during the event, he cried, naiyak, nagising, or awakened. So others explained to me that during the event, they felt they are reconnected to God. So where there are also instances of after the initiation process and actively participating in the cofradia, because some of the cofradia are also involved in the military or uniformed personnel. So they were like habulin ng chicks. So they've been mentioning that some have been mentioning that because of the cofradia, they avoided infidelity or having chicks. So okay, by looking at um, the um, life journey and eventing processes, this is an example of um, a life-changing event marked religious devotion to Ina. So we can see here moral transformation, social embodiments, skills, and life-changing events marking their lives in the process of personal religious conversion being transpired in a collective religious conversion, enabling a Catholic imagined pilgrim city of Naga during the fiesta. So, so okay, let me briefly show, some material figures that are attached with the assemblage. Okay, so in the assemblage, we can see that it is not only the individual that matters when you look at the network perspective. So transportation and other non-material um, actors should also be considered. Like for example, transportation, who will provide food for during the processions or during the life and spirituality seminars. So okay, so other like personal devotions of these members. Okay, so other parts of the network like the PNP. So I just took this photo, which is I really like because this is, so as you can see, they're military men. They are police, and then they are, but they're like okay, but when there's when there's a procession, so they like fight with each other. So okay, of course, part of the assemblage is the archdiocese. Okay, so the JOC, and so this is just a temporary uh, unedited meshwork of the Peñafrancia. Okay. So because of this, with the coffee being involved in the actively being involved in the network, taking in charge of the of some of the flow and other of image mobility. So they were able to plan and strategize with others on how the procession will flow. Okay, like they also conduct um, scenarios, plans, strategies to, like for example, these red where they anticipate other devotees to crowd them. Okay, so they able to provide formations. Okay, so swiftly looking at the surface of Peñafrancia assemblage, with Cofradia being in charge of the mobility of the image, the embodiment of Christian values through various church activities, discussions among other parts of the network, access to non-actors of the network, food, transportation, religious activities, enables the Cofradia to perform and strategize plans to accomplish their goals as dictated the church. So which is to bring their ina to churches, domains, while overcoming processions, the hardships of the processions and its rascal nature being part of their personal and collective devotions. So the entanglement of networks also tells us who is in control, seemingly on as part of the seemingly on the sideline, but directing what ought the flow of the processions be. So understanding the assemblage also shows us relationships or some contingencies, frictions in relation to the making of the pilgrimage city. So, um, so this um, making of a pilgrimage city is for me as a Bicolano and anthropologist. I think a significant portion of a Bicolano Catholic religion. So that's it for my short lecture. Thank you.
Pundo na. Iya, napundo. Ina, kadang mo. Tama tarang pa si Mother Turding.
Sir,
Putol ba? Okay. Cass, student.
yes, sir. It's time for the questions po, sir.
Okay. Maybe we can entertain questions from the four questions. If you have questions for the four panelists. I was notified time chop um my signal is choppy, so apologies for this. Okay, if you have questions po sa
There's
mga
a question.
panelists,
There's a question here, sir, from Mr. Gilbert Bea. He said that why is it only men and no women carries ina during the procession?
who wants to answer?
It's not.
Anyone from the panelists who wants to answer the question, or I should answer it? Father Francis, Maggie.
Father Francis.
Maybe I'll start. Father Francis, are you going to answer po?
Oh, are we talking about the Traslacion?
Yeah, I guess. Yeah.
Well, it has been always that way since can you hear me?
Yes, Father.
Okay. I do not have a a quick explanation for that, but it has always been that way. And my my understanding of the whole thing is that it's something that is of practical in nature. The reason why men would usually carry the andas because it's pretty squeezy and crowdy inside. But there's also the other procession wherein they allow women to carry it, most especially during May time festivity as well as the Dawn Procession.
Okay. Thank you, Father. Okay. Is there any questions po?
I also just want to add, there's lots of stories about why women are not able to participate in those aspects of the profession. One in particular that others may be aware of, but was relayed to me last year during Fiesta by a priest, there was one incident where the boat was sinking during Fluvial Procession and nobody understood why, and then they realized that I think a female police officer had accidentally been knocked by the crowd onto the procession, and that was the reason why it started sinking. And so they instinctively pushed her out into the river, and it stopped sinking and they were able to continue the procession. So there are stories that you kind of get when you ask this question. I've also been told when I asked why, I'm sure I get different answers too when I would ask why are no women allowed to participate. I was also told the only woman who should be getting attention on this day is Mary, no one else. So you get a lot of different answers depending on who you ask, where you ask. But yeah, to echo Father Francis, that is essentially how it's been. So I don't think it would change in the future. But there is the Marian processions in May for women.
Thank you, Ma'am Maddie. So we have one question here. What is the age bracket of people joining the Traslacion? Did you hear me po?
Okay. Maybe to answer that. So from what I observe, there's actually no age bracket for the Traslacion. But you can try to imagine first that Traslacion, for example, has a different parts. It's like it has different components. So at the beginning, it's like a peaceful processions where everybody can basically participate. So schools, like high school students can participate, like everybody can actually participate. But when you go near to images like the Divine Rostro and the image of Him, it's becoming rowdy and rowdy. So so yeah, so that's we have to splice translation first into this thing so that we can look at where spaces in the translation where one can actually cannot join in, or it's not actually they cannot, but it's hard for them um, to participate in this because of its rowdy nature. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Another question here. What is the main driving force why the tradition of the festival thrives among the people's hearts for a long time now? I repeat the question po. What is or are the main driving force why the tradition of the festival thrives among the people's hearts, especially for the Bicolanos for a long time?
I think one of the reasons why Peñafrancia is accepted as part of our identity, especially in our Filipino setup, because it was been adopted by our parents as part of our system in gearing up children. I remember when I was a child, I will always recall my mother will always tell us to pray before you sleep to Ina, or most of the time we were trained to go to Basilica every time we have fiesta. So I think one of the reasons why it was being continuously growing, despite of the fact that it was introduced to us as early as 1710, because it was being adopted by every family as part of their system in cheering up their children.
Thank you, Father Enrico. Is there any questions pa po? Ay, okay. In the comment in the chat box, may I also know the reason why there is a fluvial procession? What is the significance of it during the celebration? Anyone po?
Based on what I've heard is that the reason why it was introduced to us because for practicality. Remember, during those time, they don't have really roads. So the main transportation during the Spanish era is that it is by water. So when it was being introduced as part of convenience so that it would be easier to transport the image coming from the cathedral going home to Peñafrancia. And during those times, the Bicol River played very important role in the in the transport system. But on the other hand, a lot of people give other meaning to this type of mode of transportation. Some said in order to give somehow sense of holiness and sanctity to the river, because during those times they do believe that there's a lot of encanto dwelling in the river. So they were able to propose this idea because they believe that if the image were able to pass on that particular river, then the encanto, mawawala yung mga encanto. They will not be given the chance to exist. So these are some of the superstitious beliefs that was been associated to this reason. But the main reason is for practicality, so that it would be easier to transport the image during those times.
Thank you, Father. Is there any questions po? From Sir.
Okay, there's a question from Dr. Acabado. He sent me a great message. Okay, so I'm guilty not to answer his question. So the question is directed to me. So let me just read first the Dr. Acabado's question. So, Earl, is there some form of secrecy among the members of the Cofradia or rituals that are just for the initiated? How would you navigate that secrecy and taboo? So as what I have observed, working with Cofradias, there's the basic the life and spiritual seminar according to them were for some of the authorities they recognizes it, but some wouldn't recognizes it. Like yung drink. But as for as a group, there's not much of a secret because this is I heard that they also the life and spirituality seminar, for example, they do it with other religious organizations within the Catholic Church. Maybe some of our priest panelists can also comment on this. So, but on this, from the perspective of idea, so they do it in order to reinforce their personal devotion, and then when they are part of the group, it becomes a collective it's like collective devotion that is a group that they work together in order to accomplish their religious goals or devotions. So taboos, for example, I don't know, there are initiations, but these are sanctioned. They are overseeing this thing. So yeah.
There's a question here from Mr. Gilbert Bea. Why is that during the Peñafrancia, there is also the Divino Rostro? Anyone po? Hi, Father. Father Francis. Father, nakamute ka po.
Can you hear me now?
Yes po.
Can you repeat the question? Why is the divine rostro?
Why is that during the Peñafrancia, there is also the Divino Rostro?
Okay. It's well in I think way back in 1882 when there was the threat of cholera morbo to the Bicol region coming all the way from Manila. I think the vicar general during that time, it was Pedro de la Torre, and well, he is from Osa de la Vega in Spain, and that place is very much well known for the devotion to the Divino Rostro, the divine face of Jesus, and so he introduced also the same devotion here in Bicol. So by being courageous, he practically organized a procession. He introduced the procession of the divine face or the Divino Rostro, along with the procession of or the traditional Traslacion. And I think we can very much relate with what is happening today, most especially because of this pandemic. The Traslacion has been suspended, and it's a funny thing how we have reacted to the whole situation. Of course, we cannot compare directly the cholera morbo with the pandemic crisis, but instead of going out, I think the initial reaction of the church is really to suspend all those activities. So it made me think really hard, like, are we on the right track? Well, of course, there's this effort to secure the safety of everyone, but I think the initial reaction of suspending entirely all kinds of procession, not only Traslacion, but all kinds of procession in the Archdiocese, all forms of procession, fluvial, street, or on board a car or a truck, they have all been really suspended. But it makes me nostalgic about that 1882 occasion wherein the people really went out of the streets and then prayed really hard.
Okay, thank you, Father Francis. Another question here from Mr. Kelvin Meneses. Mr. Kelvin, you can.
The question is for Miss Maddie. So what types of artifacts were excavated from the site? Or for anyone who participated in the excavation?
Thanks for your question. So the Bicol Archaeological Project, we excavated at a couple different churches. Last year we were in Bombon, and the year before that we were in Camaligan for 2 years excavating at the chapel across the river or next to the river. And we also very briefly excavated at Kipayo. So most recently, at Bombon, the types of artifacts we found, we were finding bead artifacts. So I did have one slide in the presentation featuring the beads that we found. We also found pieces of earthenware pottery. So there was that one plate that we were able to mostly reconstruct. We also found a pottery coffin, which is one of the earliest of its kind that we know of, at least in the Bicol region. And we did also find several human burials. So the hope was to go back and excavate this year and to open up more excavations in Bonbon, and to also see how people were using the church property both before the construction of the church, during and after, as well as to see how far the settlement of Bicol people extended during that colonial and pre-colonial time. So unfortunately, all of those got canceled. Hopefully within the next, hopefully next year or the year after, we'll be able to go back out there. And the goal of the excavating, looking at the pieces of pottery, the human burials, the animal remains that people were consuming, is really to get a good idea of basically how people occupied this space, what they were doing, and for how long, and how they moved throughout Bicol. We're also looking for those changes during momentous events like Spanish colonialism coming, like church construction, to see how people responded and if we can see that in the artifacts, what we find and how much they find. So yeah, there's a lot still to do at Beaumont.
Thank you.
Is there any questions po?
Can I ask a question?
Yes. Sige po. Okay.
I want to ask Maddie. Since you guys have been doing the diggings about Bicol's, and you were like uncovering or discovering these pre-colonial and artifacts. Where do you go? What do I need to read if I want to know more about the history or the pre-colonial period of, for example, Bicol?
So if you want to, I can run. There's a book actually that's been published by Aya, and it basically is a summary of everything. It's called The Emerging Kabikolan. Thanks, Dr. Cabana, for messaging me that. It's a book that basically she sums up all the archaeology that has been done up to the point of publishing in the Bicol region. And so that's a great starting point to see what's been excavated, to see what we know that was happening prior to the onset of Spanish colonialism. And a lot of what she does look into, so like the Bicol Archaeological Project is very focused on the colonial period, but a lot of what she covers in her book actually goes beyond that. And so that's a really great starting point. And I think it's published by UP Press. But yes, that's a really good book, good place to start.
Thank you.
Okay, are there any questions or are we good now? Okay, I guess if we don't have any more questions, let me end this panel. First, I would like to thank our panelists, Father Enrico, Father Francis, and Maddie, for sharing your thoughts and research works about Peñafrancia and Dina. So I hope that we'll be posting this at the Museo de Isarog page and other PSU pages, so that we can share our lectures to other public. So thank you, Sir Buboy, for not sleeping yet. And to Ka Students Council for assisting us this morning. Thanks, Ma'am Lay, for inviting Pati and Nico. So thank you, everyone, and we hope to see you again on our next Balungibog Talk series. Any last words po from Annalise?
Lang po, sir. Wait lang po.
Documentation lang po, sir.
Documentation po. Pa-open lang yung camera.
Okay.
Okay. In count of 1, 2, 3, smile.
Another one.
Another one.
Okay, next. Ay,
Another one po. Okay. 1, 2, 3. Thank you, everyone. Thank you po.
okay na po.
Bye-bye. Thanks, Grace. Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you, Earl. Thank you.
Everyone for
Thank you, Earl. Good job, Maddie.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you po. Thanks po.
Thank you po.
Thanks po. Thanks po. Live na ba tayo? Live na ba? Isa lang. Thank you, ina.
Thank God.
Ano na? Anyong, nakamute.
Hindi, nag-on.
Nakamute ka mo, ate.
Ayun na,
Sana all
Ay,
nagkakana.
makakain.
Gutom na kami,
Okay
Dan.
lang.
Sayang, daw naka dyan.
Pause ka. Nice one. Sige, Dan. Kakan lang. Paarawan mo lang kami.
Maapot pa ko ako.
O, saka.
Sanay ka naghapot.
Ano hapot mo? Baka aram ko yan.
So ano, kung ang Aurora tradition baga, every September baga yan. Nagigibukan
Usually,
kaya.
ang kagadan, ang Aurora kaya usually baga, kay Mama Mary baga, ang Aurora kaya usually kay Mama Mary yan, every May baga. Ang iba kaya may September, may May.
May December.
Ayun, depende
Sa
kaya
mga kaya, ang Aurora may pag may event sa simbahan, halimbawa, April nga, ma-Aurora bago mag-fiesta, tapos
pero doon baka
pag
ano
September,
yan? Makuman Aurora ang apod.
Baka perdon.
Anong image ang tig tig proposition?
Mas yan ang image, Aurora ang apod.
Igo kayo magkakayan, ang Aurora kaya, usually, yan, si Mama Mary yan, tig tapos yung, kasi ka pa kansaro apod, Santa Cruzan baga, so cross ang tig proposition.
Sa Muya May.
Sabi kaya, nasabi na kaya sa kuya ni Sir Earl. Sasabi ni Sir Earl na
Kailangan.
nasa partido da